I am Vicky. I am married to Jim, and he has clearly missed his calling in the theatre. But I am a great, I can't stand interaction and things like that, so this all freaked me out a bit this morning. Good job, Jim. Does anyone's parents ever tell them that they have got eyes in the back of their heads? Anyone's parents ever tell you that? My mum definitely told me that. A few hands up over here. Did you believe them? Have you been looking for their eyes among their hair? Ada believed them. Oh, thank you for keeping the interaction going. Well, I think children believe that parents have got eyes in the back of their head because parents have a knack of knowing exactly what their children are doing or what they're going to do, even when they're not looking at them. Now, how do they know this? Well, I'm sorry, parents, to ruin the myth, but it's not because they've got secret eyes tucked back here. It's because they know their children so unbelievably well. When you know someone really well, you know how they're going to respond in a certain situation, even without looking at them. So the story we're looking at today, that Jim just so beautifully led us in, is the story of the prodigal son. And although it's Mother's Day, we're going to be using this story. It's not Mother's Day, it's Mothering Sunday. We're going to be using this story to think about how God, as a loving parent, is watching and waiting for us. And if you haven't picked up a little person and you want to use it during the talk, then there's a box on the second row back, and you can run and collect one now. So we don't need one, it's not essential, but we're going to use this person to think about how God is always watching for us and always waiting for us. So first of all, God is always watching out for us. Have a quick look at your little person. He's got eyes in the front of his head. Definite, have a check, not eyes in the back of his head. But a reminder that God is always watching out for us as his big eyes are there open. Well, a few years ago, me and Jim were youth workers in Kent, and we had one boy in our youth group called Sam. There's always one of them in a youth group who was a bit cheeky and a little bit of a rogue, but a very, very fun person to be around. I wonder which one of you would be that person. Now, in this, you're all pointing straight at him. In this particular instance, so one day Sam decided that he wanted to skive off school. He was in like year 10 or 11, decided he didn't want to be at school, went home in the middle of the day. Now, what Sam didn't know was that his dad had a job in government. He was somewhere in position in the MI5. And it was a top secret job. But consequently, his whole house was kitted out with cameras all around it because it was needed such high security. And the door particularly had a camera on so that when anybody went in the door, it recorded it and sent it straight to his dad so he knew what was going on. So Sam skived off school, went home in the middle of the day, got in the house, got a call from his dad, absolutely furious, wanting to know what on earth he was doing at home in the middle of the day, and he had been rumbled. Then that reminded me, when I was preparing this story, that prodigal son, that son who had gone away, he had disappeared and he'd been gone for years, but his dad knew exactly what he was doing. Pick up that little person again, have a little look at his eyes. His dad was there watching for him. There was no reason, after all those years when the son went on his way home, that the dad would have been there watching and waiting for him, except for the fact that God is always there watching and waiting. There was no social media, there was no electronic doorbell, there was no magic tracker on him. He wouldn't have known that after all these years, his son was coming home at that time. But he was there with his eyes wide open, watching for him. And why? Because God is always watching over us. No matter what we're doing, no matter what we're thinking, whether we feel close to him or not, God is always there watching, and it's a picture of that. Jim quoted some verses from Psalm 139 earlier on in the service, but in that psalm it says, "Where can I go from you? If I go right into space, or if I go right down into the depths of the earth, or if I travel to the other side of the earth, you are there with me, and you are watching and waiting for me." And I think sometimes we forget that God is there watching for us. I spent lots and lots of time in my youth trying to forget that God was there. Not doing anything particularly wrong, but just not really interested in him, doing my own thing. And I don't know where in your week you might be most likely to forget about God. Have a little think and tell the person next to you, where in your week might you be most likely to forget about God? You got 10 seconds. Great. I think sometimes in our week, we just forget about God, or sometimes we actively try and pretend that he's not there. But just like that parent with the eyes in the back of their head, God is always knowing what we're doing. He's always waiting for us, and he's always ready to receive us. So whatever stage you're at, whether you are getting on with your week and just not really including God, whether you'd rather forget about him, whether you're in a good place or a bad place, whatever you are doing, God is always watching out for you, and he's always there ready for you. So secondly, first of all, God is always watching for us. Secondly, he's always waiting with his arms wide open. See if you can bend your person if he hasn't. Only about 3 of these, their arms stay in the right place. But this person always waiting with his arms wide open. Like a loving parent, God is always there waiting with his arms wide open. He won't let us down. Again, turn to the person next to you. If you had to trust someone to catch you, who would you trust? Tell the person next to you. Who would you trust? Toby, you are popular. Yeah, I can see that. You're quite reliable. Great. Okay, you can stop your conversations. If you had to trust someone to catch you, who would you trust? And why would you trust them? Well, I think I've got quite a high level of trust for Jim, you'll be pleased to know. And I think if I had to trust someone to catch me, he would be quite a safe bet. He's fairly reliable. He's bigger than me. He loves me. And he's quite a good guy. I'd wait for you to catch me, so you'd be pleased to know. But the problem is, a few years ago, as a youth team, we went gorge walking. And if you haven't been gorge walking, you have to jump down waterfalls. Now, I am not a big fan of water sports. I'm incredibly nervous, and I'm not a big fan of heights. So we got to the top of this one particular waterfall. It had been raining a lot. It was October. The water levels were bordering on dangerous. And the guy said, I want you to go down this waterfall, tuck your arms in, because if you go out, then you'll break your arm. And at the bottom, somebody will catch you. The person who went before will catch you. Otherwise, you'll go off into the next bit, and it'll be dangerous. So I was thinking I'm okay, because I'm nervous, but Jim went before me, so he is going to be there, ready at the bottom to catch me. So off I went down this waterfall, terrified, got to Jim, who just let me float past. And the current kind of carried me, and fortunately, I mean, it didn't feel like it at the time, but I got my head with a helmet on, wedged between 2 rocks, so I didn't go down the next dangerous bit. But Jim was like, oh, mister. You can find out afterwards whether it was on purpose or not. I'm still not quite sure. But the great thing is that God won't let us down. God is waiting there with his arms wide open. There's nothing that is too strong or too dangerous or too fast to pull us away from him. He won't get distracted. He won't just have popped to the shops. That father was there waiting with his arms wide open. In fact, he wasn't even just standing waiting with his arms wide open. He was actively running towards the son with his arms wide open. If Jim had have actively paddled through that water to grab me, it might have been a different story. But God is actively running towards us with his arms wide open, waiting to grab us. because of what Jesus has done for us on the cross with his arms wide open. We're going to look at the story more, of course, over Easter. But Jesus died on the cross with his arms wide open to forgive us our sins. And that means that God is always waiting for us with his arms wide open. So this is all really great, but what does it mean for us? Does it mean that it's all done for us and that we don't need to do anything, that we don't have a part to play? Well, I think not really, because if we're feeling far off from God today, although he's watching for us and he's waiting for us, we can learn something from the son in that story, because the son had to turn back to his father. We tried to turn these people earlier and it didn't really work, but if you turn your person round, the son had to turn to the father. He had to swallow his pride. And he had to go back and say, help me. I want you to help me, Dad. Just like this toy, in order to pick it up and play with it, I would have to go to it and I would have to reach out to it. And in order to receive God watching and waiting for us, we have to turn to him and we have to go to him. So we have to stop ignoring him or stop just not involving him in our week. We need to turn towards him. And maybe that's you today. Maybe that's a challenge that you need to turn towards God and receive his love. Or maybe you're a Christian and you're totally fully aware that God is there for you and you know him and you feel him in the week. So what's the challenge for you? Well, I think the challenge for you is to let other people know that God is a God who's waiting with his arms wide open. I think a lot of people who we meet in the week know that God's watching them, maybe watching them and judging them with a pointy finger. But do they know that God is there with his arms wide open as a loving father waiting to welcome them? So that's our challenge today. Do you know God for yourself, waiting with his arms wide open? Because you're welcome to come to him. And if you do, then how are you showing other people that God is there, waiting with his arms wide open? Will you turn to him and will you receive his love and help others to turn to him today? We're going to pray.